handed out an outline there. I put it on the back table. Hopefully you got a copy there. It's just kind of an outline that I put together of where I want to go over the next few weeks. This is one of those things that I wish I could tell you the day I started that this is exactly an 8-week Bible study, but chances are it will fluctuate and probably be longer than that as we move forward. But I wanted to give some idea of where we were going. So let's look at the outline. Then I'm going to read the passage in Revelation 20, and then we're going to look at the overhead for just a minute here. But my outline that I have there, and yet Revelation 20, if you want to turn there in the meantime, Revelation 20 is the text we're going to use. It's going to be the foundational text we'll use for this whole series that we have together. But we're going to look at the timeline in a few minutes. Where does this fall in? I think we have a good understanding of that, but we'll look at that briefly anyway. And then what's the purpose of the millennium? That's kind of our Bible study tonight. We're going to look at that in some detail. What's God doing through the millennium? Why does he have that time period in there? Why don't we just all go to heaven? And why is there that period? Why is that separate from everything else? We want to look at that. The Bible gives us some good insight on that. And then we want to look at the church and its tie-in with the millennium, and in particular, that picture of the Jewish wedding. We're going to do a whole study on that for a week. I think we'll find that some very strong parallels in that Bible study. Then, obviously, number 4 in my outline there, we're going to look at Israel in the millennium. And that's really, I think we would say, maybe an emphasis of the millennium, is what God's doing with the nation of Israel, fulfillment of promises and prophecy for the nation of Israel, fulfillment of so much for the nation of Israel. We're going to look at that separately there. Number 5 there, what are some of the characteristics of the millennium? The lion will lay down with the lamb. There will be prosperity. There will be peace. There will be universal worship. All those things, we have a lot of passages of Scripture that'll probably take a couple weeks, but I want to look at some of the characteristics of the millennium. The Bible has a lot to say about that. Both Old Testament and New Testament has a lot to say. We're going to look at that. Number 6 there is what's the role of the church in the millennium? And so that's in contrast to number 3. How does the church tie in with it? Number 6 there is what's our role in the millennium? What do we do? And I kind of asterisk that because that's kind of an emphasis of this study. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Number 7 there, Satan. What's going to happen to Satan? And we can cover that pretty quick. He's bound for 1,000 years, right? He's bound. He'll get loose for a season. We're going to talk about that a little bit. There's also a number of judgments leading into the millennium at the end of the millennium. There's some judgments that we need to focus on. Like the great white throne would be at the end of it. The separation of the sheep and the goats at the beginning of it. Things like that we'll look at as we move forward. And then the conclusion of the millennium, or I could have said the new heaven, the new earth, what the Bible has to say about that. It's been a number of years, and so I think a little bit of explanation is worthwhile here. But for 30 years, Cass Santos was the pastor of Bible Baptist Church of Sharmanstown. And he retired in 1989. In 1989, when he retired, him and his wife began to spend some time in Florida. But they also moved for their Pennsylvania residence to a home in Lake Mead in East Berlin. And after they left Bible Baptist and began to transition between Florida and East Berlin, they began to attend church here at Cedar Hill Baptist Church. And I think those of you that were here through those years would all agree that Pastor Santos was a godsend in that time. He was a stabilizing influence. He was a man of great wisdom. He was never the pastor of Cedar Hill Baptist Church, but he preached a lot at Cedar Hill Baptist Church and was very involved in the operations of getting the bylaws that we currently have put together, of changing the name. It wasn't actually Cedar Hill when he came here, of changing the name. A number of things Pastor Santos was involved in. This is Pastor Santos's pulpit and communion table from Bible Baptist. When after he retired and they remodeled, they gave those things to the church here. I remodeled them and made it a little bit bigger when we moved over here. But this is his pulpit, and his name is on it. And so Pastor Santos had a big influence in Cedar Hill Baptist Church. And he had a big influence in my life. And so Pastor Santos, when I first came here, I remember that being somewhat intimidating at first. right? I came here as a kid preacher, and those of you that don't know, I'm the guy who did everything backwards, right? You go to college and get your degree, and then you get ordained, and then you become a pastor. And so this church hired me as the pastor, and then I finished my degree, then I got ordained, and then I got my degree. I did everything exactly backwards. So, as a kid preacher, I show up. I know this is a small church. You're running about 30, 35 people on Sunday morning. And my first time I stand up to preach, Pastor Santos is sitting right about where Irma's sitting, And I know who Cass Santos is. He preached at chapel when I was growing up. He was the pastor of the big church in Charlotte. I knew who he was, and I had no idea that he attended this church. But Pastor Santos kind of took me under his wing. He gave me a lot of resources. He took me to a lot of different places. He spent a lot of time with me. My father had obviously passed away before I became pastor, and he was my spiritual father. And I'm not saying that lightly. He wrote to me and called me his spiritual son. And those were his words. And so he had a great influence in my life, not just the church. Pastor Santos gave me a book. And the name of that book, he gave me a number of books, but one of them that really was interesting was he gave me a book called The Servant Kings. The Servant Kings. And it was the whole book was about the millennium. And he had well used this book. He had paper clips in it, highlighted, the paperback binding was broken. And so over the years, I went to buy a new copy, and it had been updated. And it's been renamed Final Destiny. Final Destiny. Now it's about that big. I have a copy in my office. There's a copy in the church library, too, that the church has. But it's about that big. And it's just kind of the encyclopedia of the millennium. And so, if you'll bear with me, that's kind of my textbook. A lot of the resources I pull are from that, from something Pastor Santos gave me. Very spiritual book. And by that I mean this guy gives chapter verse for every point that he makes. And I appreciated what he has to say. There are those that are going to argue that the church kind of takes a back seat in the millennium and that it's all about the nation of Israel. And I disagree with that. I believe our role is going to be significant, just as significant as the nation of Israel in the millennial kingdom. And this is the one thing that I want you to take from this series. It's why I put an asterisk down there. This is the one thing I want you to take from this series, all right? The Bible tells us God is going to wipe away all of our tears in heaven. And the Bible tells us that will happen after the millennium, not before it. I believe that what we do on this earth, listen, I have been preaching my heart out for 4 weeks now, that what we do has nothing to do with our salvation, right? But I believe what we do for Christ has a lot to do with what our role will be in the millennial kingdom. And I believe there's going to be a lot of Christians in the millennial kingdom that are going to be sorrowing for 1,000 years because they wasted the life they had. And now for 1,000 years, they're suffering, and I'm using that word in quotations. Praise God, we're in the millennial kingdom and not in the alternative. You understand? But we're suffering the consequences of a wasted life. Or, more importantly, if I want to look at the positive side of it, those who have lived a faithful life that have been told, well done, thou good and faithful servant, will reap the rewards of that for 1,000 years. Now, the end of that that's the conclusion, my last point of the end of that is this. At the end of 1,000 years, God wipes away our tears, and we spend eternity with him, where what we did on this earth no longer matters. But I believe it does matter in the kingdom, and that's the case I'm going to build over these next 8, 10, 12, 20, 50 weeks. I don't know how long I will be teaching. No, it won't be that long, but as we build through the millennium, that's the case that I'm building here, is that Christ taught over and over and over again, the kingdom of heaven is like, and he would warn them, and he would teach them, there are things that we have to do to prepare. We're laying up treasure in heaven. We're preparing for the millennial kingdom, and I believe we have to be very careful with that. So that's my emphasis, all right? So I want you to take from this that, boy, I think what I do now will matter someday. It will. You know, I'm getting off on a little bit of a sidetrack, but I remember growing up as a kid, because I grew up in church all my life. I always went to church. I don't remember not being in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, or whenever the doors were open. I remember thinking, as a kid, if we earn crowns and then we just cast them back at Jesus' feet, right? As a kid, you're like, so why do we do that? Right. As I've grown spiritually, I understand, we understand that it's because Christ did everything. He did it through us. For some reason, he uses us, but we owe everything to him. But there is a reward. And that reward, I believe we're going to see, is reaped in the millennial kingdom. There's an opportunity for us to have been, those who have been found faithful, to redeem that in the millennial kingdom. And that's the emphasis of what we want to look at. I'm going to start with this one slide, just because we've used it a number of times as I've taught through Revelation. I know this is not the easiest thing for you to see from where you are. I've given out copies of this. I will continue to give out a copy if you want a nice big copy. I have bunches of them in my office. But we are right here. 1,000-year millennial kingdom. We've kind of covered the Battle of Armageddon. We see here the Great White Throne Judgment. That's at the end of the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. New heaven and new earth. That will go on, obviously, for eternity. There is no end to that. But this is a 1,000-year time frame that God's going to restore things on this earth the way that he intended it to be. And so we're going to focus this entire series on this 1,000 years right here. And so I'm not going to look at the timeline again. This is the emphasis of where we're going to be over these next several weeks. Revelation chapter 20, starting in verse number 1. Revelation 20, starting in verse number 1. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, a great chain in his hand. He laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil, and Satan, and he bound him 1,000 years. He cast him into the bottomless pit, shut him up, set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, until the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. I saw thrones, they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. He shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about, the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. Verse number 11 starts with the great white throne. We'll get to that later, much later in this series. So I want to talk about this 1,000-year reign with Christ. And we believe, I'm not going to give a lot of background on this. There are lots of different thoughts, opinions, and theories on the millennial kingdom, but we believe this is a literal 1,000-year period of time. We believe it's 1,000 years of ruling and reigning with Christ on this earth. We believe that this is something that will happen after the tribulation, and so this is something we are looking forward to. There's a big movement today in your millennial camps and so forth that, we are in the millennium, and the millennium is a spiritual thing seen through the church. And so, no. The Bible gives some very specific details about this time. And so I'm not going to get into all the other theories and all the other thoughts. I would have to believe if you attend and are a member, regular attendee of Cedar Hill Baptist Church, we're on the same page, that this is a 1,000-year time period, literal time period, a perfect time when Christ rules and reigns upon this earth. So what's the purpose of this? That's my lesson for tonight, and something I want to spend a little bit of time on here tonight. I wrote down 3 things that I thought were important as we look at this particular time period. First of all, it will fulfill God's purpose for man to rule the earth, kind of a return to the Garden of Eden. God told Adam and Eve that they were the caretakers of the earth, that they were put there to mind and take care of the garden, and that all things were subject to mankind's authority. I believe that we could agree on a number of different things, and so we're going to hit some things that maybe are hot topics today. But number one, obviously, man ruined that with sin. That is without debate. We understand that. Mankind sinned, and so a curse came upon the earth, as well as everything else, as well as the effect upon man. But it came upon this earth, and so we work by the sweat of our brow. It's not easy to, obviously, as opposed to the way God created it, it's not easy to garden, to get the produce from the earth. We're battling the wind. We're battling the environment. We're battling the rain and famine. We're battling all those things all the time. I got talking to Desi. In my little garden, I'm battling everything from rabbits and groundhogs to weeds, to too much rain, not enough rain, right? All those things affect us. That wind, strong storm came through yesterday afternoon. Some of my corn's laying over. We're battling all these things all the time. So we're out there working and trying to keep the bugs, the pests, the animals away from our produce. We're trying to keep the right amount of water or not too much water. We have to worry about it freezing too early in the spring, or too late in the spring, hitting our crops, or coming too early in the fall. And all these things we're battling all the time. Adam and Eve didn't have to worry about that until they sinned. And it changed everything. There's a curse upon this earth, and God's going to remove that curse. I talked about that in a sermon a couple weeks ago. It's also God's plan for mankind to rule on this earth. And I think we see also the negative effect upon man, of man upon the earth. I am not, I think you know this, I'm not a tree hugger. I'm not an environmentalist wacko guy. At the same time, Desi and I were in Baltimore yesterday, Friday. We were in Baltimore Friday at the Orioles game and stuff. I grew up in Baltimore. I was born in Baltimore. That water in the Inner Harbor is downright disgusting. It's gross. Wouldn't want to fall in it. Don't want to drink out of it. It's really disgusting. And man is responsible for that. We've dumped too much junk in there. We don't take care of it. I don't think we really take care of the earth the way God intended us to. Even with the curse, I think we tend to abuse the earth. I think too much contamination. Even the pictures we have of those, trash floating way out in the ocean, and it's gross, And so who's responsible for that? Man is. And so God's going to restore order and put things back to the way he intended it to be. And so we see that coming. Genesis 1, let's look at these verses. Genesis 1:26. You can leave Revelation. Won't get back to there tonight. Genesis chapter 1. Genesis 1:26. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he, male and female created he them. God, isn't it interesting? God made 2 genders. Just thought we'd point that out. He made 2 genders. Verse 28, God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. God gave a command there in verse number 28 of what his expectation was for this earth. Go to Ezekiel chapter 36. Ezekiel 36. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel. Back in that neighborhood there. Ezekiel chapter 36. Yeah, Ezekiel 30, we're going to see Ezekiel come up a number of times throughout this study, but verse 35, chapter 36, verse 35, they shall say, this land that was desolate is become like the Garden of Eden. The waste and desolate and ruined cities are become fenced and are inhabited. And so we see a restoration of the earth, of what God had intended things to be. Things restored to the way that God had planned for it to be. We study that when the spies were sent by the nation of Israel into the promised land, they sent the 12 spies into the land. They came back and talked about Israel being a land that flowed with milk and honey. They had grapes, right? Clusters of grapes that it took 2 men to carry. Remember those type of things? Yeah. Have you seen pictures of Israel? It looks pretty sandy, rocky, and desolate to me, right? It doesn't look like a land. What has happened? Well, a sin curse has happened, number one. And man has had an impact, a negative impact upon the earth, number two. I do not believe that we are responsible for global warming. But I do believe this, the Bible tells us that in the tribulation time, it's going to get hot real fast. And God's going to do that. He's talking about the earth being scorched. God's doing that. We're not, our carbon monoxide emissions and all that stuff from the cars and whatever. But we have to be mindful and not wasteful of what God has given us. He put us in charge of the earth, and we tend to be, as human beings, reckless with it. And not to be understated is the problem with sin upon this earth. So God will restore his original plan. We believe that Genesis chapter 1, what God intended in Genesis chapter 1, will be ultimately fulfilled in the millennial kingdom. What God had planned for mankind to do, the way he wanted mankind to replenish the earth, to enjoy the earth, to benefit from the earth, without the curse, without the sin, without all the things that God had planned for Adam and Eve, but sin interrupted, and of course God knew that, they will ultimately be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom. Letter B on my outline. God's going to fulfill his promise to Israel. And so that God, Jesus Christ, will rule on the throne of David, right? There's a promise there. We could talk about all of God's promises to Abraham. And then we can talk about God's promises to David. So the Abrahamic covenant, and the David's covenant, all the different ones that we see where promises were made, they will ultimately be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom. Because Israel will be the center of power. They will be the center of government. They will be the center of worship in the world during the millennial kingdom. And so they, right for the last, not way before Christ. So for the last, 3,000 years plus, Israel's been kicked around. Israel's been mistreated. Israel's land has been encroached upon. They've tried to stomp Israel out, tried to wipe Israel out, tried to do whatever they can to bottle them up. And God continues to bless that nation. And it's amazing what they've been able to accomplish with what little they have. But there will be a time in the millennial kingdom when their power and their right will be restored. When Christ will rule from the throne there in Jerusalem. We saw at the end of the millennium, when Satan stirs up those against Christ. And I don't know about you, but isn't that just, I don't want to say hard to imagine, but almost mind-boggling that even with Christ ruling on the throne, mankind will still set their heart against God. They will still reject him. One of the things we're going to talk about down there, it's my next point, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But listen, mankind will still set their sight, and it says they encircle what? God's city, Jerusalem. 1,000 years, if the rapture happened right now, then 1,007 years from now, there are still going to be people trying to attack and wipe out Jerusalem. It's still going to be under attack because of the hatred of God's chosen people. because it's God's center. It's the way God ordained it. Anyway, it'll fulfill God's promise to Israel. Letter C there, it will reveal the real cause of sin. For 1,000 years, Satan is chained and tied up. And nobody can say, the devil made me do it. Right? The real problem with sin is the condition of man's heart. It's our sinful nature. Adam, when God came down and confronted Adam and Eve, Adam, of course, blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. But the problem was Adam and Eve chose, by their own free will, to disobey God. They chose to reject. They chose to do what they wanted to do. They chose to listen to the serpent and not the God who had created them. And for 1,000 years, we're going to see that the real problem of sin is man. Satan will be loosed for a season. He will stir the hearts of those opposed to God once again. Mankind will be without excuse because there's Christ ruling and reigning on the throne. Everything is perfect, and yet mankind will still want more, something else. They will still reject Christ. Not all, but some will still reject. And Satan will stir them up in opposition to Christ. Let's look real quick at point number 3 on my outline there, and we'll get into this, I think, in some more detail the next time. But I thought this was interesting. I wanted to share some of this with you. If we look at the church in the millennial kingdom, we see the picture of a Jewish wedding. So I'll kind of introduce this tonight, and then we'll talk about it in more detail next time. But obviously, we understand that in the Jewish heritage, there was a betrothal period of time. This was a period of time such as Joseph and Mary were in, right? This was a period of time when the husband would go and would tell the family that he wished for their daughter's hand in marriage. And then she would be betrothed to him, and then he would go back and begin to prepare a place. He would prepare a home. He would get things settled so that he could come back and take her back to his home that he had prepared for her. That was the picture that was set. It's the same picture that Jesus Christ said in John chapter 14 when he said, "Let not your hearts be troubled." Why? I'm going to prepare a place for you. And where I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself. They understood that. That was the standard of the day. That was a standard tradition of the day. And so Christ set that as a standard of his relationship to the church. And so we have a betrothal period. Listen, that we are still in, right? He hasn't come back to receive his bride yet. He's still preparing a place. There was a thought, and just think about this for a minute, but there was a thought that if young Johnny went to his prospective in-laws and said, "Hey, I would like to marry your daughter," and they're like, "Okay, I'm going to go back and get a place ready, and then I'll come back." Sounds good. If he's gone for like 48 hours and comes back, everybody goes, "Uh-oh, what kind of place did he prepare? Does he have a tent? Was he living out of his van? Common vernacular. What, right? You would expect him to be gone long enough to put some preparation into it. You would expect him to be gone long enough that he was preparing something worthwhile to present when he brings his bride back home. Jesus Christ left for a period of time. He's preparing a place for us. He's preparing a place that's taking long enough that we're going to be awed by the wonder of that which he prepared. And so he's preparing a place for us. We're in that betrothal period. The rapture, of course, is him coming to get us. And he gave that example, right, with the 10 virgins with the lamps. Some were ready, some had, didn't have enough oil, and some had prepared for that. And boy, he comes back kind of unexpectedly. Some are not ready when he comes back. We better be ready when he comes back. We better be expecting him to come back. We should be looking and expecting him to come back at any time. And so that's the rapture of the church. And then we have the marriage supper time. The marriage supper was the reception. And the Jewish people, and maybe we are more like this today in America than ever before. But, when my grandparents got married, they had a wedding at the church. And then, I think they had some cake, real quick. And then that was it, right? Today in America, people have a wedding, and then they spend $30,000 on some big reception hall with tons of food and a big party and a DJ and they spend more money on the reception than anything. So we understand that in America. The Jewish people were not unlike that. The Jewish people would have a ceremony and then follow it with a lavish event. They would have a big event. It was a festive time. There was a lot of food. There was a lot of joy. This was the first time Jesus Christ introduced himself in ministry to the public, right? At the wedding in Cana. That's where he went. So this was a big event in the Jewish culture that when they had a wedding, boy, they followed it with a big reception. Think of that as being the millennial kingdom. This is the time that we are enjoying fellowship with Christ. It would be the marriage supper. It would be the honeymoon season with Christ, a time of enjoyment, a time to rejoice in that time. We're going to get into some real details if we want to look at specific, logistics of this. That we are presented to Christ in heaven after the rapture, but the marriage feast is most likely back on earth at the beginning of the millennium. And we can give some strong biblical evidence to that. Most importantly being this, and we'll look at it later, I promise. It tells us that the nation of Israel are guests there. And where does that happen? Well, that would happen back on earth during the millennial kingdom. And so we're looking at this being a festive time. And then what would a marriage of Jewish people be? Well, it would be followed with, and I'll again use common vernacular, you live happily ever after. And God's going to have all of eternity, new heaven, new earth, all of eternity that we spend with him. And so this 1,000-year reign with Christ is a short, again, think of this in the time frame that you and I understand today, in the time frame that we have today. And that is, boy, he's been gone for 2,000 years, preparing a place for us, and then there's a 1,000-year feast. In those type of perspectives, it's not that long of a period of time, is it? Right? It's not that long of a period of time on God's scale and on God's time. And so there's a plan being prepared. That's the church's role in all of that. We have some personal responsibilities there as well, and that's what I want to look at in more detail in the weeks ahead. Hi, this is Pastor Wes Gunther. We just want to take a moment to thank you so much for listening to the recording of my message today. At Cedar Hill Baptist Church, we would like to be of help and encouragement to you, and we would love to hear from you. If we could pray for you, if you have a prayer request that you'd like to share with us, if you'd like to give some feedback on the message that you heard today, we encourage you to send us an email and let us know how we can help you. Our email address is cedarhillbap, cedarhillbap@gmail.com. You can get more information about our ministry at our website, chbcdillsburg.org. Thank you.